Hi everyone, welcome to Bonnie Carolee Makes Cards. I never seem to have enough birthday cards. Spellbinders' new die set, A2 FILIGREE Marquis, was a great opportunity to build up my stash. This die set has many components which can be used together or separately, so today we're shaking it up. Literally. The openness of these dies make them perfect for making shaker cards. Each of the shakers is unique because of the 8 dies that are included in this set. They can be configured in many different ways. As usual, if anything grabs your attention, all the products that I'm using in these cards can be found in the description of this YouTube video or on my blog at bonniecarolee.com. Okay, here's shaker 1. I began with a panel of dark gray cardstock that was sized 5 inches by 3 7/8 inches. It was die cut with these 2 dies that were held together with a little bit of post-it note tape. I have a piece of lilac cardstock the same size that I want to use for just the background of the die cut design. I line up the 2 panels together and just use a paper clip to hold it in place. A piece of post-it note tape will make sure that nothing goes out of alignment as it goes through the die cutting machine. Don't forget to remove the paper clip. And there we go, the 2 panels will perfectly align to one another. The die cuts are quite fine, so I'm going to apply Tombow glue. It will be set aside to dry for a few minutes until it's in its tacky and repositionable state. Now I can prepare the foam to create the shaker. The foam is the same size as the lilac panel. The die is put in place and all 3 are fed through the die cutting machine. The foam has stretched a little bit and it will have to be trimmed down. I want to use a foiled sentiment, so I'm working with heat-resistant acetate. It has been trimmed down just a bit smaller than the panel. I'm using a sentiment from Spellbinders, Let Your Sentiments Shine Brighter. Ignore that little piece of post-it note tape that's on my machine. I was trying to stack it before I put it on, but I had my foil backwards, so I ended up taking it apart. The sentiment die is facing up. The shiny side of the foil is facing down. The acetate goes on top, followed by the plate and the shim plate. The platform on the Glimmer Hot Foil system replaces the one in the die cutting machine. It is slowly rolled through, and there you go, a hot foiled sentiment on acetate. With the Tombow glue completely dry, the gray frame can be attached to its lilac background. Liquid adhesive is applied to the underside of this panel so that the acetate one can be adhered to it. The acetate can easily slip out of alignment, so I set it aside to dry completely. After about 5 minutes, glue is applied to the foam so that the panel can be mounted on it. Because the foam stretched a bit, I focus more on aligning the inside of the frame. When it is completely dry, it will be trimmed down. And while it is drying, matte gold cardstock is die cut with the inside die for the frame and the outline die for the medallion. Trimming down foam on a paper cutter can be a little bit challenging. If your paper cutter does not have a press plate, then I would advise just using your scissors. Adhesive was applied to this gold frame using tape runner. This is not something that I often use, but I do keep it on hand for applications like this. I don't want the liquid adhesive seeping out onto the acetate. I work around the frame, aligning it, making sure that I'm not allowing it to touch the acetate until it's positioned properly. That completes the top of the shaker. I like to use a microfiber cloth just to clean up the acetate. When creating a shaker, I like my shaker element to be completely independent of the card base. A lilac and gold sequin mix is placed in the center of a gray cardstock panel that measures 5 inches by 3 7/8 inches, the same size as the top of the shaker. Liquid glue is going to be used to put my shaker together. Thin streams of adhesive are applied to the foam. It looks like a lot in this video, but in fact it isn't. You may have noticed that I started working on a white sheet of paper. It just made it so much easier for me to line things up. Even with my reading glasses on, I need help. I pop my MISTI on top until the glue is dry. I want good contact between the foam and the base of the shaker. We don't want sequins flying out everywhere. The shaker can now be adhered to a panel of matte gold cardstock that is slightly larger than the shaker. I wanted the card base reveal around the shaker to be even, so I ended up trimming the base down to slightly less than an A2 size. It measures 4 1/4 inches by 5 3/8. The Filigree Marquis set also comes with flower and leaf dies. Several flowers were die cut from blue violet, lilac, and matte gold cardstock. The leaves are all out of the gold. When creating an arrangement with lots of small die cuts, I like to put together small groupings first. In addition to these small flowers, I also added in the smallest bloom from Spellbinders Cinch and Go Blossoms. A large grouping of the flowers was placed on the upper left-hand corner of the card. A grouping of 3 flowers balances it out on the opposite corner. The centers of the flowers are finished off with small gold pearls. 1 shaker down and 2 to go. This Slimline Shaker is going to be created with just the marquee element of the die set. The detail and outline dies were used to cut holographic rainbow paper. Isn't it gorgeous? I lined up the dies to make sure that each die cut would catch 3 of the 6 rainbow colors. I'm cutting a black cardstock panel that measures 3 3/4 inches by 8 7/8 inches. That is just enough room to use the outline die to create 2 shaker openings. The acetate is cut slightly smaller. It's attached to the panel and set aside to dry. Just like the other card, the foam was cut in the same way. The cardstock panel was placed on top, then the die positioned, and it was run through the machine twice. It needed 2 die cuts. Yes, obviously. By using the cardstock panel to position the dies, it ensures that everything is going to align. And now with the foam in place, we have 2 separate shaker elements. I'm using Tombow glue on the 2 medallion elements that are going to be attached to the acetate. I don't want to have any glue smearing. When you do multiple cards with similar techniques in one video, it feels like you're constantly repeating yourself, and for that I apologize. However, I am going to repeat this because it's important. These marquees are set aside to dry completely until that Tombow glue is in its tacky state. When the marquees are placed onto the acetate, I make sure that I'm following rainbow order. So I'm starting with that orange-red at the top, and then for the second marquee, I start with the blue at the top. The shaker material for this card will be a beautiful rainbow confetti mix. To make sure I'm getting the confetti where it needs to be, I keep the base panel right next to the marquee one. Just a little test to make sure I've got enough shaker material, and I decide I need a bit more. I happened to catch a video by Christina Werner, and she had this awesome little trick for stacking the shaker panels together. The base panel goes into the corner of your stamping platform. There is a lip around the edges that is high enough to tuck that foam-backed one in, and it is perfectly aligned. Now, isn't that the best trick ever? The card base for this card is out of black cardstock and measures the very same as the panel, 8 7/8 inches by 3 3/4 inches. For this fun card, I'm going to use a series of sentiment strips from Spellbinders Mini Sentiments. The sentiments are organized to follow a specific order, so following the theme of rainbows, I'm making sure that they are coordinated with the correct color. The sentiments are placed face up on the Glimmer Hot foil machine. The foil is placed shiny side down on the sentiment and then covered up with the cardstock. There's enough room to get all 6 sentiment strips on here. The plate and shim are placed on top. The platform from the Glimmer Hot foil system replaces the platform from the die cutting machine, and the platform is slowly rolled through. So I have to tell you, this is the second time that I'm doing these sentiments. The first set was foiled on the rainbow holographic paper. It actually looked quite cool, but you couldn't read it unless it was in a certain light. Of course, I didn't realize it until all the sentiments were on the card. These sentiments were adhered to the card with tape runner because I didn't want to use liquid adhesive on the acetate or the foil. They were pretty sticky, but they actually peeled off without damaging a thing. The mini sentiment comes with dies to cut the strips. I had cut not just the sentiments, but also black foam and mounted them. I'm using liquid adhesive to adhere the new sentiment on top of the other one. I found if I held that stacked sentiment on its side and looked straight down that I could tell if the sentiment was in fact centered on the foam, and then I could trim the ends off. Now, would it have been easier for me just to cut new foam strips and stack them? Yeah, probably. So here's the scary part. That never really even occurred to me until I was editing the video. Some days, I'll tell you. Anyways, that adhesive that was put on with the tape runner was extremely sticky still, and I was able to pop those sentiments right back on the card. So, as you saw previously, the rainbow confetti was placed here and there around the panel, again following the rainbow order, and then they were topped up with Nouveau Crystal Drops Morning Dew, which is like a standard practice for me. When the morning dew dries, it's clear, and they look like crystals, and they are perfectly coordinated with the shaker material. This final card is a double shaker. The 2 shakers are made independently of each other. This first one will be using the marquee dies. Using both dies, the marquee was cut from silver metallic cardstock. Just the outline die was used to cut acetate and another piece of silver cardstock that will serve as the base of the shaker. The marquee is going to be adhered to acetate, so I'm using the Tombow glue. Some card making sessions go more smoothly than others. This is not one of them. This time, however, it is technology related. So I'm going to have to describe how this is being put together. These foam strips by Doris are super thin. They're so thin that they were able to fit around the border of the marquee. Once the backing is removed, the strip is very flexible and it was easy to fit it around all those curves. A light blue sequin mix was placed on top of the silver base. This foam tape is very sticky, and once the shaker top goes on the base, those sequins are not going anywhere. Now on to the second part of this shaker card. I'm beginning with an ink blended panel of Bristol Smooth cardstock using shaded lilac, cracked pistachio, and peacock feathers. The detail frame and the inside cutting edge are just laid on the panel so that I can position the inside cutting edge. I place a panel of blue cardstock underneath and run them both through the die cutter at the same time. The blue panel has an indentation to allow me to easily place the die and finish cutting it. I want to use the ink blended die cut in the background. I'm just using some Scotch tape to hold it in place on the blue panel. Now the upper and base panels will match. The ink blended frame is die cut with the detail die. To make sure that I have clean cuts, any of these dies with lots of detail, I run them back and forth in my die cutting machine about 3 times. The frame panel was laid on top of matte silver cardstock of the same dimensions, and the inside cutting edge die was positioned. All 3 were run through the machine. I followed the same process when I die cut the foam. Tombow glue is applied to the detailed frame die cut. It is set aside to dry, and while it is drying, I can go ahead and attach the matte silver frame to the acetate. This frame is then attached to the foam backing. I pop my MISTI on top and let it dry completely. The base panel, which was the one that we did the inlay on, is going to be adhered to the card base. The detailed frame die cut can now be adhered to the foam-backed panel. The excess foam is trimmed down. For the silver marquee shaker, I used a blue sequin mix. So now for the ink blended shaker, I'm going to use silver confetti. The foam back panel is attached to the bottom of the shaker. Some weight is put on it to let it dry completely. My sentiment for this card is from Spellbinders Layer Mix and Match Sentiments. This set consists of both script and coordinating shadow dies. The Happy Birthday script is die cut from matte silver cardstock and then dotted with Tombow glue and set aside to dry. A small panel is ink blended using the same colors that were in the background to die cut the shadows for the sentiments. I also die cut some flowers and leaves. The flowers and leaves are arranged in 3 groupings. I do use liquid adhesive to adhere the marquee shaker to the acetate on the larger one, so I'm very careful as I position it. I leave it to dry under some weight. I do not want that marquee shaker slipping and creating an ink smear on the acetate. The Tombow glue on those fine scripty sentiments is dry and it is in its tacky and repositionable state. They are easily adhered to the shadow die cuts. Both the centers and the little flower details are adhered to the marquee shaker. The flower centers are embellished with small yellow confetti and then topped with Nouveau Crystal Drops Morning Dew. And that finishes up this pretty double shaker. I hope you enjoyed this video featuring Spellbinders A2 FILIGREE Marquis. This set of 8 dies can be configured in so many ways, opening the doors to all kinds of possibilities. It was a lot of fun coming up with different styles of shaker cards. Thank you so much for stopping by. As always, I appreciate your visit.